Morning, everyone. We are looking at chapter 36 in A Child's History of the World. Today's chapter is titled, Thine is the Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory. Bet a lot of you actually would know what that's in reference to, the Lord's Prayer. All right. Augustus Caesar had been ruler of the world. He had found Rome brick and left it marble. He had had a month named after him, and he had been made a god. No, Mommy's reading. Excuse me. Surely no one could ever be greater than him, huh? Yet, a man was living at the very same time who would have a far greater impact on world history than Augustus Caesar ever did. Who do you think they're talking about? So if the title is from the Lord's Prayer, who did the Lord send to us? Yep, Yeshua, Jesus. Okay. Augustus himself knew nothing about him and lived and died without ever having heard of him. This man was born in the eastern part of Augustus's empire in a tiny little village called Bethlehem. And his name, as Lily said, was Jesus. See, we call him Yeshua, which is the Hebrew version of his name. For many, many years after Jesus was born, no one except his family and friends knew or cared anything about his birth or paid the slightest attention to it. Jesus was a Jew, the son of a carpenter. As a boy and a young man, he led a very simple and quiet life, working in his father's shop. He did not begin to preach until he was more than 30 years old. He did not, I just about read the same sentence again. Then he went about teaching the people many of the things that are now part of the Christian religion. Actually, a number of religions.
Why is it so cold?
Says it's 70 degrees in here.
I turned it up.
Okay, why don't you go get some slippers on and a sweatshirt? Or wrap up in a blankie. He taught that there was one God over all. One. Anybody remember what the belief in just one God is called? Do you remember what the belief in one God is called? It is called monotheism. Monotheism. He taught brotherly love, that one should love one's neighbor as oneself. He taught the golden rule, that is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Treat people the way you want to be treated. He taught that there was a life after death, for which this short life on earth was only a preparation, that therefore you should lay up your treasure in heaven. Don't eat that. By doing good works here. Some of the Jews listened to Jesus and believed what he taught. They thought he was going to set them free from the rule of the Romans, which they hated. Some of the temple priests, however, were afraid. There goes my book. Were afraid of what Jesus taught, because so many people listened to him and believed in him. The priests were afraid they would lose their influence to a man whose ideas they believed were wrong. So they plotted to have him put to death. Now, the men, who were plotting Jesus' death could not have him put to death without the permission of the Roman ruler, of that part of the empire where Jesus lived. Now, this ruler's name was Pilate, Pontius Pilate. So they went to Pilate and told him that Jesus was trying to make himself king. Jesus had said he was a ruler, but that he was a heavenly ruler and not an earthly king. Stop making funny faces in the camera, goofball. Listen to what Mommy's reading, please. These men knew that Pilate would not care at all what religion Jesus taught. There were all sorts of religions in the Roman Empire. Oh, excuse me. Whew. Those that believed in idols, and those that believed in the moon and the sun, and so on. One more new religion made little difference to the Romans, and Jesus would not be put to death simply for teaching another. But the priests knew if they could make Pilate believe that Jesus was trying to make himself a king, that was a thing for which he could be legally put to death. Pilate did not believe much in what they said against Jesus. It was a small matter to him, but he wanted to please them and keep his government in order. So he told them he would have Jesus put to death because they wanted it. So he authorized Jesus' crucifixion, that is, to have Jesus put to death by hanging him on a cross, a common but very painful method of execution in the Roman Empire at the time. Addie, will you please get me a Kleenex? Mommy's nose is acting silly. Jesus had 12 of his fellow Jews to teach what he told them. Had chosen 12 fellow Jews. Okay, not had 12 fellow Jews. These 12 men were called apostles. Excuse me for a moment. Look out for low-flying geese. Adelaide, you need to get your schoolwork together, girlfriend. My kids think I sound like a honking goose when I blow my nose. Okay. These 12 men were called apostles. After Jesus was crucified, the apostles went through the land teaching the people what Jesus had taught them. Those who believed in and followed his teachings were called disciples of Christ, the Greek word for Messiah or Christians. The apostles were teachers. The disciples were pupils. Most people in the empire found it easy to add one new god, but Christians could not do that. The Romans thought that these disciples of Christ were trying to start a new world empire and that they were against Rome
Mom,
and the emperor. What?
who cares if they do?
Well, yeah, true.
Mommy, in this book, there's a title called 100 Ways to Die.
Great. Don't interrupt again. I'm almost done reading. All right, let's see. Blah, 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 blah. Most people in the empire found it easy to add one new god, but Christians could not do that. The Romans thought that these disciples of Christ were trying to start a new world empire and that they were against Rome and the emperor and should be arrested and put in prison.
Mommy?
What, babe?
I love you.
I love you. Can you let me read, please?
Mm-hmm.
The Christians, therefore, held their meetings in secret, sometimes even underground places, so that they would not be found and arrested. After a while, the leaders of the Christians became bolder. They came out of their secret places and taught and preached openly, although they knew they might sooner or later be thrown into prison and perhaps killed. You read about a lot of disciples and apostles that were put into prison a number of times, some that were even stoned and survived. All right, let's see.
And?
That is the word and. Indeed, so strongly did they believe in the teachings of Jesus that they seemed even glad to die for his sake. as they believed he had died on the cross for them, which he did. He died for us. In the first 100 years after Jesus, there were a great many Christians put to death because they were thought traitors. Christians who died for their belief in Jesus were called martyrs. A martyr is somebody who's put to death for what they believe. The first martyr was named Stephen. He was stoned to death about 33 AD. One of the men who helped in putting Stephen to death was a man named Saul. Saul was a Roman citizen and was proud of his heritage. He thought the Christians were enemies of his country, and he did everything he could to have the Christians punished. Then, all of a sudden, Saul had a change of heart and came to believe in the religion of the very people whom he had been fighting. Whatever Saul did, or whatever he believed, he did or believed with his whole soul. Though he had never seen Jesus, he became one of the chief Christians, and then was made an apostle, and was called by his Roman name, Paul. Paul's story is actually pretty spectacular. Ask your mom and dad to read it to you from the Bible. Paul preached the new religion far and wide, just as earnestly as he had fought against it at first. Then he too was condemned to death. Paul, however, was, as I have said, a Roman citizen, and a Roman citizen could not be put to death by the ordinary judges who were not Roman citizens, nor in the ordinary way by crucifying. So Paul appealed to the emperor, but he was put in prison in Rome, and afterward beheaded. Sore throat. He is known as Saint Paul. Peter was another of the chief apostles. Jesus had said to him, "I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven." Peter, too, was thrown in prison and was sentenced to be crucified. He asked to be crucified with his head downward. He thought it too great an honor to die in just the same way as his Lord. On this spot in Rome where Peter was put to death was built long afterward the Cathedral of St. Peter. As everything before Jesus' birth is called BC, and everything since his birth is called AD, you would naturally suppose that 0 would be the date of his birth. It's not. It was not until some 500 years later that people began to date from Jesus' birth. And then, when they did begin to date from this event, they made a mistake. It was found out that Jesus was really born 4 years before he was supposed to have been. That is, in 4 BC. But when the mistake was found, it was too late to change. It's the way the cookie crumbles sometime. Hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the week. We'll see you next time. Ta-ta.